Palm Sunday, Gospel of Matthew. I'm absolutely enamored with this very bizarre little textual detail in the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 21, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Palm Sunday, Jesus is going to be crucified soon. When they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her." Two animals, donkey and a colt. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this: the Lord needs them, and he will send them immediately. This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, and the prophet here is Zechariah, particularly in Zechariah 9:9, if you want to look it up. The quote is, "Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road. He rides in. They say, "Hosanna to the Son of David," the Palm Sunday moment. Okay, in the glory of Palm Sunday and the beauty of the triumphal entry of the peaceful king, one might overlook a strange fact in this story. Matthew actually has Jesus riding on two animals, apparently simultaneously, with one leg over the colt and one leg over the donkey, coming into town. No other gospel quite has this detail. I believe Mark records this same scene as Jesus comes in. I can't find it right now. Maybe it's somewhere else. I don't know. Look it up yourself. Okay, I'll put a link down below to where else this is narrated. But this is very strange. Like, why riding the two animals? Okay, it seems, and I've looked at some articles and some commentary on this. I'm just going to summarize for you directly here this odd fact as we wonder what to make of it. It seems that Matthew has taken a literary device from the book of Zechariah, from the prophet, a particular prophetic, poetic way of speaking that's used throughout the Hebrew Bible called parallelism, which I'll explain in a moment, has taken this literary device and basically made it literal and has Jesus enacting a very strange deed, riding straddled across two animals simultaneously, when maybe that's not what Zechariah had meant. Let's go back to the quote here. It's the same quote in Matthew itself, but I turn back to Zechariah. And I'm reading the NRSV here, by the way. Zechariah 9:9. The heading that the NRSV gives is, "The coming ruler of God's people. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem." You can hear already the type of literary device that we are calling parallelism. Parallelism is sometimes described as saying a thing and then repeating that thing over again. I don't think that this is quite the best way to do it. James Kugel, in a book called The Idea of Biblical Poetry, has a better explanation of parallelism, where he says, really, parallelism is a way of speaking, it's a way of thinking, where you say a thing and then you say another thing related to that thing. And he wants to keep it broad like that, because if you only think of parallelism as saying a thing and then repeating the thing afterward, it's not always like that. So you could be kind of deceived and you could miss actually really interesting literary details if you only thought of parallelism as repeating. Surely there is a type of parallelism that we might call synonymous parallelism, where the author really does say a thing, A, and then what's more, B, where A and B are very clearly related to each other. Like, for example, in the verse I just read, Zechariah 9:9. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem." You can hear in that repetition that the author here is not suggesting that rejoicing greatly and shouting aloud are two totally different activities, or that daughter Zion and daughter Jerusalem are two completely separate groups of people. No, it's pretty clear that it's the same group of people. It's an image of the nation, right? Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Synonymous parallelism. We can also have, though, disjunctive parallelism, contrasting parallelism, where you have two things that are very different from each other. One that I just think of now off the top of my head would be the very first Psalm. Psalm 1 is good for this kind of disjunctive parallelism. Really, even on the level, it doesn't even have to be on the level of just a line. It can really be blocks of text. So like Psalm 1, "Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread. See the synonymous parallelism there? But their delight is in the law of the Lord. So now you have a contrast. So you have a thought, a block of thought, and now a contrasting thought. Happy are those who do this, but they do this rather. They are like trees planted by streams of water. Verse 4, the wicked are not so. Okay, so the second half of the poem is like a disjunctive parallel to the first half. You can also have parallelism, which is like stair-step parallelism, where there's a statement, and then the second statement really elaborates on it or takes it further, not just repeating. Do we get the idea of parallelism? Okay. I'll put some links below, and you can do some research, read Kugel's book, look at some ideas of parallelism. There's been a new book about biblical poetry out recently too, which I'll put a link to down below. Okay, now here's the moment. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. Beautiful passage. Now, going back to the quote here, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. If you were to do a literary analysis of this here in Hebrew, and the translation here I think is fine in the NRSV, you would say, yes, this is synonymous parallelism. He's not talking about an individual who's coming and riding on a donkey and a colt at the same time. He's doing this kind of poetic restatement of the line, which Matthew takes to somehow mean that there are actually literally two animals involved in this. Now, of all of the gospel authors, Matthew is the strangest to seemingly misunderstand this, because he's known as the author of the most Jewish of gospels. He's the most familiar with his audience who are Jews. I mean, not all of the gospels seem to be written by Jews or for Jews. Certainly Luke and Mark have a very broad Gentile appeal. John seems to be have a Jewish appeal as well. But I mean, Matthew is just like at pains to show Jesus' continuity with the Old Testament, with the Hebrew Bible, with the story of Israel, with the Hebrew language, even though he's using the Septuagint or the Greek language here for the quotes, or at least somebody is who's transmitting Matthew to us, okay? So what the heck is he doing? I mean, the option that most people have recognized here is just that he seems to sort of like misunderstand the poetry, or if it seems theologically uncomfortable to say that he misunderstands the poetry, saying that he just adopts it in a very direct way. I don't know if you were there with an iPhone camera today, taking video of the scene, if we are to think that we are to actually view Jesus straddled across two animals. I don't doubt that in some stream of very conservative scholarship you can find attempts to solve this, maybe the idea that Jesus does two triumphal entries, one on the donkey and one on the colt, the foal of the donkey, in a row, so that this is then technically accurate. Note then that if you do that, though, you're telling a story that Matthew doesn't tell, because he seems to say that he comes in riding on them in the plural. I checked the Greek here on this. This is all a good translation. So like, what's exactly happening here? I mean, I take a cue, as I often do, from Richard Hayes in this book, Reading Backward. When he gets to the end of his book, which is really about the way that the gospel authors treat the Old Testament, he kind of makes an assessment of each of the gospels. His assessment of Matthew is kind of like, look, Matthew, this is the word of God, it's scripture, but like not every gospel maybe speaks to every audience and every time in an equally compelling way. And maybe Matthew is just not as compelling to particularly contemporary Gentile audiences, someone like me, as other gospels. He thinks Luke actually is the most compelling for our time, for what it's worth. But he talks about drawbacks to Matthew's narrative portrayal of Jesus' identity. And I mean, he's not talking about this passage, but I think the comment applies. He says, second, another drawback, while Matthew draws together many different biblical motifs, and while he projects the fulfillment of all of them onto the person of Jesus, it is not always clear that he has reflected systematically or coherently on how to integrate the resulting picture. How is it, Hayes asks here, how is it possible for Jesus to be simultaneously the figural fulfillment of Israel returning from exile, the new Moses who expounds Torah, and the actual embodiment of Israel's God eternally present to his people? It's not clear that Matthew has thought this through. Okay, so, Richard Hayes, who passed away recently, is a pretty direct, some would say conservative Christian type, and he's even willing to kind of say maybe Matthew hasn't thought all this stuff through and is just like very eager to show Jesus in this fulfilling position. I can also imagine here, though, if one were to try, what if one were to try, just experimenting here, okay? What if one were to try to somehow redeem this, what seems like a mistake or an eager over-reading of the parallelism, and redeem it into some kind of theologically meaningful thing? I could imagine, I haven't tried to look this up, but I wouldn't be shocked to find some church father or another, someone like Augustine or Irenaeus or Origen, saying that Jesus riding the two animals here, that the two animals represent somehow Jesus' two natures as human and divine. It's a very creative way of reading, to read things in this way with a lot of symbolism, a lot of, this kind of spiritual reading. One worries that the spiritual reading here is a little bit detached from the literal body of the text. If Jesus is fully God and fully human, you want him to be fully God and fully human without really relinquishing one of these things. And so too, in the reading style, you don't just want to throw the literal reading out the door, the kind of flesh and bones historical reading, because how is Jesus actually straddling these two animals while trying to mystically show us that he is both God and human, which is actually not stated in the passage. Okay. So maybe that's a way. I don't know. I guess I kind of like it because it's creative. I guess this is just a private mystical thought, which I'll share with you, a private narrative interpretation, which may not be appealing to anyone else. But I do, despite the fact that as an historical motif, I do not find the idea that Jesus is actually straddling two animals to be compelling. I don't know, just in meditating on this passage this week, since I heard it preached in church last Sunday, I do find it compelling to think of Jesus awkwardly trying to ride these two animals, in the sense of thinking of Jesus, the expectations upon a man at a moment like this, what he's supposed to be, to deliver Israel somehow, and yet also to be meek and mild. And he will not deliver Israel in the way that perhaps many of his fellow countrymen and women expected him to deliver. So he's truly in an awkward place where he's trying to straddle both of these animals, as it were, both these sets of expectations, or really just two as representative of all kinds of expectations. And I think of any of us how we might have to straddle two different animals of our work and our family life, or our presentation with this group of friends versus our presentation with our family or this group of friends, and how awkward it can try to be, how awkward it can be to try to be two different kinds of person or three different kinds of a person, just in your own life. Hard to imagine Jesus straddling the animals, though, literally, but it is kind of fun to think about during Holy Week.